everyone. I'm Linda Dixon from the Lexington Veterans Association, and I'm happy to welcome you to a presentation of Night of the Assassins, the untold story of Hitler's plot to kill FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. We extend a warm welcome to our fellow veterans at the Edith Norse Rogers Memorial Veterans Hospital, who may be watching in Bedford, Massachusetts. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Howard Blum. Howard Blum is a former investigative reporter for the New York Times, who was twice nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. He's also the author of more than a dozen nonfiction books. His recent nonfiction bestsellers include The Last Goodnight, Dark Invasion, and The Brigade. He won the Edgar Award for Best True Crime for American Lightning. The Columbia School of Journalism and Harvard's Nieman Fellows shortlisted his book, In the Enemy's House, as one of the 5 best nonfiction books of the year. In his review of Night of the Assassins, military analyst and naval officer Jerry D. Lenneberg wrote, "Ian Fleming himself could not have written such an improbable yet actual plot. The moves and counter moves in this tight and engaging story show that World War II was fought just as much in the shadowy back alleys as on the battlefield." And before I turn the program over to Howard, I just want Bob Lewis to say a few words, because Bob read the book and he is a walking testimonial for Howard. So Bob, say a few words, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have read Night of the Assassins and I recommend it to you very highly. It's exciting and it's fascinating and it's true. The book has a very interesting structure in that it first starts with a viewpoint of the Nazi planners of the assassination, and then it switches over for a chapter from the viewpoint of the American Secret Service agents who were trying to protect our president. So it goes back and forth. So you get the story from both sides. I encourage you to read it. It's a fascinating and exciting, true story. Now let us begin. Howard?
Thank you for your generous words. When I was first writing Night of the Assassins about a year or so ago, remember back then when we could all be in the same room before we knew what social distancing was, before Zoom? It seems like part of another lifetime, but I digress, and now's not the time for such digressions. When I was first working on the book, I would spend a lot of time reading about World War II, and I would try to put myself in the shoes of the people I was reading about. I'd be wondering, would I have been able to find the prudence, the wisdom, even the courage to make the sort of decisions that were necessary in a time of crisis to protect my family and myself. I'd be at my desk in Connecticut, where I am now. It is like where you are in Lexington, a New England town. I'm on a hilltop surrounded by fields, old stone walls, and a pond. It's a very bucolic, even pastoral place, cut off from the world. But I would then in my mind try to put myself into World War II, and I would try to find the empathy. I would wish I could find the talent and the imagination to bring to life what it was like to live in a time of great unknowns, of great danger, of never knowing what was going to occur next. Well, now it's a previously imagined year later or so, and I can say, be careful what you wish for. Now, I'm not claiming that living through a pandemic is the same as living through a war. There's not an enemy trying to conquer our country, to take our treasure, to replace our moral values with theirs. But we are living through a time of crisis when we're struggling to protect our lives and our way of life. And as in a war, as in World War II, today we look to our leaders to help guide us through these complicated times. We look to our leaders to help us find a way through this unsettling period and guide us into a future where our lives and our jobs are as before. And I think we just had an election that was largely about the nation trying to find a leader who would be best able to guide us through a time of crisis. And so I think we'll be able to understand with a chilling sense of immediacy even the story I'm about to share with you today. It's a largely previously unknown story from World War II about when the three Allied leaders were put in harm's way. It's a story about Hitler's realization that what he couldn't accomplish on the battlefield, he would be able to accomplish in a daring mission. The mission to assassinate the three Allied leaders, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, when they attended the Tehran conference, where they met for the first time in November 1943. The assassins, a well-trained group of commandos led by a man who was known as the most dangerous man in Europe. The stakes, well, nothing less than the future of the world. And one man, FDR's Secret Service head, the head of the detail, Mike Riley, had to find the brains, the initiative, and the courage to thwart this attack. It's a story that really begins months before the Tehran conference. In January 1943, on the last day of a meeting that FDR was having with Churchill in Casablanca. On the last day of this meeting, FDR calls the press in and he makes an announcement that takes Churchill entirely by surprise. He says the Allies will fight until the unconditional surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan. And this harsh, unforgiving ultimatum of unconditional surrender not only surprised Churchill, it also completely astonished the Nazis. Up until this point, the more realistic Nazi leaders were fully convinced that the war had been lost on the battlefield. After the successful Allied invasion of North Africa, after the surrender of the German forces at Stalingrad, and now that bombers were rolling off the assembly lines of American factories and being sent to Europe, they realized they couldn't win a fighting war. However, the Nazi high command still had a very pragmatic endgame strategy. They believed they could pull a stalemate from the jaws of defeat. By that I mean they would keep on fighting, and then the Allies would say, "We've had enough," and they would sit down at the negotiating table. But now with these two harsh words, unforgiving surrender, they knew there would never be a negotiated peace. The historians in Germany realized that the last time such an ultimatum had been given was in ancient times, where Rome gave this ultimatum to Carthage, and Carthage was completely destroyed. And they also knew that now, since there would be no negotiated peace, they would have to appear before war crime tribunals, and they would have to answer for their crimes against humanity, for their crimes against civilians, for their crimes against the Jewish people. And they knew what the verdict would be. They would be marched to the gallows, and they would be hung, unless something could be done, unless something could be done. And so on the first week of July 1943, two men met in the Eden Hotel on Budapester Strasse in Berlin to see if something could be done. Now, the Eden Hotel in wartime Berlin was the site for a different sort of intrigues. This is where the taxi dancers gathered. These were young boys, barely teenagers, who for a few marks would dance with the lonely German war widows. But that night at the Eden Hotel, in a room right off the bar, the two men who met were Germany's two chief spy masters, and they had something else on their mind. One of the men was General Walter Schellenberg. He was 33 years old, the youngest general in the entire German army. He was also an SS man. He was in charge of Section 6. That was the SS's cloak and dagger operation unit. But Schellenberg was not your typical SS thug. And he wasn't even a true Hitlerite. He wasn't an ardent believer in Nazism. What he was a pragmatist. He had been a lawyer before the war, and he joined the SS because he thought it was a way of getting ahead. And now he saw this gilded future that he had imagined for himself threatened. The other man he was meeting with was old enough to be his father. This was General Wilhelm Karnassus, Admiral Karnassus. And Karnassus was the head of the traditional German military intelligence organization, the Abwehr. And these two men met because they had just heard something a week ago on the radio, and a speech Churchill had given. And he had announced that the Allies were planning to meet for the first time to discuss the future of the war. The meeting had not been set, and the time and the location of this meeting, when they would be set, would be top secret. It would be one of the greatest secrets of the war. But Churchill was hoping that it would happen, and now these two spy masters were hoping that would happen too. It would give them a chance to maybe change the course of the war and to change the fates that awaited them from Allied courts. So they began to discuss the problem. And as soon as they discussed mounting a mission against the three Allied leaders, they realized how daunting it would be. It would be an impossible mission. First off, they didn't know the date or the time of this meeting, and they'd probably never be able to find out. And without this intelligence, it would be impossible to plan an attack. And also, there was a question of the attack itself. The Allies leaders would be the most closely guarded men in the world. How are they able to pull off a mission? What sort of tactics and strategy would allow them to get close enough? And yet, even as they realized how impossible, how daunting this mission would be, they realized they had to keep on thinking about it. And then, on September 12th, 1943, something happened that was able to convince them that maybe an impossible mission could in fact succeed. On September 12th, 1943, high in the Italian Alps, 7,000 feet up, out of the clouds, 12 gliders swooped down out of the sky. These gliders had German swastikas on their fuselages. The man leading in the lead glider was a Nazi captain by the name of Otto Skorzeny. Skorzeny was a famous commando, ruthless. When you think of the Aryan Superman, that's pretty much Skorzeny. He was 6'4", broad shoulders, a dueling scar etched on his cheek, and he had been selected by Hitler himself to lead this mission. The mission was to rescue Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator. He had recently been imprisoned by the Italian king, Victor Emmanuel. And they had put him, Mussolini, in an abandoned hotel on the top of a 7,000-foot mountain. And so Skorzeny threw himself into how he could put together a mission to rescue Mussolini. And the only way up the mountain is in a cable car, a single cable car, and it's guarded by a battalion of crack troops. The hotel is also well guarded. You can't land a plane on this mountaintop because there's not enough room, and the mountaintop is very rocky. You can't send parachutists down because the winds at 7 feet will blow them off the mountaintop. So Skorzeny comes up with this idea about gliders. And on that afternoon, 12 gliders swoop down. 5 of them are blown off the mountain. Everyone inside is smashed against nearby adjacent mountains and they're killed. Skorzeny's glider crash lands on this rocky terrain. He crawls out of the wreckage, rallies the remaining troops, and they storm the hotel where Mussolini is there, and they succeed in rescuing him. 2 nights later, at midnight, at Hitler's hideout in the Bavarian woods, they present the Italian dictator to Hitler. And Hitler is overjoyed. All Germany is rejoicing. It's a victory they've needed. And even the Americans, the New York Herald Tribune writes about this on the front page and says that Skorzeny now is, quote, the most dangerous man in Europe. And so General Schellenberg, head of Section 6, approaches Skorzeny and he says he would like him to run the mission to attack the three Allied leaders. He wants Scorzini to pick the best soldiers from Germany's elite commando battalions, train them, and get them ready for this mission. And Scorzini says, no, it can't be done. They'll be too well protected. It will be impossible. So the spy master very shrewdly says, that's why when you succeed, you'll become the most famous warrior in German history. And with that bomb to his colossal ego, Scorzini signs on to running this mission. But even as he's putting the mission together, he gets an abandoned castle outside the grounds of Sachsenhausen concentration camp. He starts recruiting men, training them, getting them in shape. But he realizes that this mission will most likely never happen because he doesn't know where or when the Allies are going to meet. Oddly, coincidentally even, at the same time, FDR, the American president, is also trying to figure out where and when this meeting will take place, if it takes place at all. Up to this point, he and Churchill have been sending messages to Stalin. They've been suggesting places where they could meet. FDR first wanted the meeting to take place in Fairbanks, Alaska, but Stalin didn't want to go there. FDR then suggests, well, we'll put a battleship off the coast of North Africa and we can meet there. Stalin doesn't want that either. Churchill then rather quixotically suggests, well, we'll meet in the desert in 3 tents. And Stalin doesn't even deign to answer that. So now, in desperation, on November 2nd, FDR summons into the Oval Office Mike Riley, the head of his Secret Service detail. He's going to send Mike on a secret mission to find out if this meeting is going to take place and where. Now, Mike is 33 years old. He's a former college football star. He grew up in a small silver mining town in Montana, and he describes himself with self-deprecating humor as an Irish cop with more brawn than brains. But there's more to Mike's assessment of himself. He really has a bad case of what psychologists would call the imposter syndrome. He's not sure he's up for this job. And who can blame him, really? He was appointed to the head of FDR's detail just 2 days after Pearl Harbor. He got the job over more experienced agents because FDR liked him. And now Mike has to protect a war crime commander-in-chief. And it's the first war in history where the enemy can send their bombers across oceans to Washington, D.C., when the enemy parachutists can drop out of the sky on the White House grounds. And Mike has to deal with this. And there's also something else that makes protecting FDR a unique challenge. FDR is paralyzed from the waist down. He is literally a sitting target. He can't take a single step. And further compounding Mike's problem is his relationship with FDR. Mike's father had left the family when Mike was 9 years old. And now in FDR, Mike has found the father he always wanted. His commitment to FDR's safety is not just one of professional responsibility, it's one of deep affection. He cares about the man and wants to make sure that he's safe. So now FDR calls Mike in and he tells Mike, I want you to go as quickly as possible to Morocco. I want you to go to the airport, the Mansara airport outside Marrakesh, and you're going to meet someone there. And he will tell you whether or not this meeting with Stalin is going to take place. FDR doesn't reveal anything more. He is purposely mysterious. He likes to be his spy master in chief. He likes his little bit of drama. But Mike obeys. He makes his way in 5 days to Morocco. He's standing at the airport where he was instructed underneath a palm tree. And 11 that morning, a car pulls up. In the front seat, there are 2 officers, and there's someone sitting in the back. He can't make out who. He waits, as FDR has instructed him, till the officers leave the car, and then he starts moving from the palm tree towards the car. His first instinct is to run, but he also realizes there could be Nazi spies hanging around the airport, and he doesn't want to attract attention. So he slows himself down, walks slowly to the car. The back door opens just as FDR said it would be. It's not locked. And he sits down in the back seat, and he sees that he's sitting next to the US Secretary of State, Cordell Hull. And Cordell Hull reveals to Mike that he just returned from Moscow where he was meeting with Stalin. And he got Stalin to agree to a meeting, and Stalin wants to meet in the Iranian capital city of Tehran. So now Mike knows where the meeting is. He has to hightail it to Tehran to check out the security precautions, to check out what needs to be done for the president's arrival. But the first thing Mike has to do, he has to look at a globe. He has no idea where in the Middle East, Tehran, or even the country of Iran is. They didn't teach him that in the little silver mining town that he grew up in Montana. Meanwhile, as Mike and FDR are finding out that the meeting is going to take place and where it's taking place, so do the Nazis. And they find out by a spy. It's a special sort of spy, a spy that's called a walk-in. And a walk-in is the most reviled member of the espionage world. He's so disliked because you don't know why he's coming to you with information. When he knocks on your door bringing secrets, you don't know if he's doing it for the money, if he's doing it out of ego, he wants to be an actor on the world stage, or is it something more pernicious? Perhaps he's spreading disinformation. Perhaps he's really sending you down dead ends. And this is what keeps spy masters up at night. But this man walks into the German embassy in Ankara, Turkey, and says he's the valet to the British ambassador. And each night, the British ambassador takes a strong sleeping potion before he goes to bed. But before he conks out, and he conks out soundly for at least 8 hours, the valet says, he leaves the keys to his safe on his nightstand. And the valet says, I can take these keys, I can open up the safe, I can take out the secret diplomatic documents, I can photograph them, put them back, and I will deliver them to you. But I want 20,000 British pounds. That's the equivalent today of about $970,000. Let's call it $1 million. He wants $1 million for this. And now Schellenberg, the head of Section 6, the cloak and dagger unit, has to make a decision. Is this disinformation? Should I take this? Is this valid for real? And what about giving him $1 million? So he quickly solves the $1 million problem. He has his counterfeiters crank out 20,000 worth of British pounds. And he decides to pay the man with its counterfeit money and see what he delivers. And what he delivers, according to Schellenberg, is, quote, absolutely stunning. He delivers confidential documents. And the spy now gets the code name of Cicero. They name him after the Roman orator because these documents also speak very eloquently. And in these documents, Schellenberg discovers that the Allies are going to meet in the last week of November in the Iranian capital city of Tehran. And when he reads this, Schellenberg can't believe his luck. Why? Well, since the beginning of the war, the Nazis have been running a spy operation in Tehran. They have an entire covert network set up. They have safe houses and agents already in place. They also, in the last 6 months, have been sending in teams of commando by parachutes into the country to sabotage Allied Lend-Lease shipments that were going on trains across northern Iran. And the very man who's been leading these sabotage missions has been Otto Skorzeny, the same commando he designated to lead the attack on the 3 Allied leaders. So Schellenberg now gets to work, and he gets his spy, the head of the station in Tehran, to start checking out the 3 Allied embassies. And what this spy finds is a bit of a concern. The embassies have high walls, they're guarded by troops. He doesn't see how the commandos will be able to get inside to get at the leaders. And then he realizes something. Tehran is a city filled with cholera. There's raging disease, and water is delivered, fresh water to the wealthy households. But he notices that there are never any water trucks at the three embassies. And then he discovers the reason why. The Allies have dug water tunnels from the mountains outside Tehran to the embassies. And these water tunnels bring in fresh water every day. And he now comes up with a plan where the commandos will be able to enter these water tunnels about a mile or so from the embassies and then sneak beneath the troops who are guarding the embassy into the embassy grounds. Schellenberg hears this, he's encouraged, but he still has another problem. How can I pick the right time for this attack to take place? I need a time, he decides, when he's certain the three Allied leaders will be together, because it's a very contentious alliance. They'll be walking out on each other, they'll be fighting. He needs a social occasion when they'll be together, when they'll be relaxed, and hopefully their guards will be relaxed too. So in his lawyerly, methodical way, he starts doing research. And he discovers that on the last day of the conference, November 30th, that also coincides with Winston Churchill's 69th birthday. And he decides that on Churchill's 69th birthday, that evening, it's a certainty that the three Allied leaders will get together for a celebration. And he's right. There's a photograph in my book of Churchill's birthday party on that night. The three Allied leaders are in the British Embassy dining room, sitting shoulder to shoulder, birthday cake in front of them. And at that moment, if Schellenberg's plan is going to come to fruition, that moment, the assassins will be emerging from the water tunnels, crossing the grounds of the British embassy in the moonlit darkness, making their way towards the dining room, about to burst in to deliver Hitler's birthday present, just as the Allies are singing "Happy Birthday, dear Winston." Schellenberg now believes that his impossible mission can actually succeed. Meanwhile, Mike Riley has arrived in Tehran. Now, wartime Tehran is a city of 1 million people. It's also an occupied city. There are Allied soldiers on each corner, armed. There are tanks rumbling beside the camels on the main boulevards. And as Mike finds out, it's a dangerous city. There's a large fifth column element there. This town was very pro-Hitler. In fact, the entire country, when the war started, was pro-Hitler. The Shah had the name changed from Persia to Iran because Iran means Aryan. So Mike just says, as he writes in his memoirs, Tehran is a city where bad things can happen. And he goes to meet his Russian counterpart, General Dmitry Arkadyv. Arkadyv is head of the NKVD. That's the precursor to the KGB, the Russian intelligence service. And Arkadyv says something to him. He says, "We have a spy in Berlin embedded there, and he's just told us that the Nazis are asking for weather reports for the last week of November. It seems that they might be up to something, but they can't know about this secret conference. It must be some other sabotage mission." But in Mike's profession, there are no coincidences, and he feels something has to be done, and he calls a crash meeting of the OSS, that's the US's War Crime Intelligence Service, our precursor to the CIA. And he expects the entire OSS station to appear at this meeting. And all that walks in are two young boys, boy spies, he calls them. They're 25 years old. They were graduate students, one at Harvard, one at Princeton. Before the war, they studied archaeology, and now they've been sent to Tehran because they know a lot about ancient Persian kings, but they have no idea what's happening in Tehran today. And Mike can't believe that's all the OSS has in this city in the days before a presidential visit. And he says, "Well, don't you have anyone in place?" And they say, "Well, yeah, we've got a 25-year-old guy we pulled out of the motor pool. We've embedded him in a German, pro-German cafe because he speaks German and he can eavesdrop." And when Mike hears this, he doesn't know whether to scream with rage and frustration or to laugh at the ludicrousness of it all. And he hightails it out of Tehran and goes to meet with FDR. And he says, boss, he calls the president boss as a term of respect and affection. He says, boss, you can't go to Tehran. It's not safe. There's too many question marks there. And FDR says, Mike, I have no choice. It's the one place Stalin wants to meet. What we're going to discuss is crucial, not just to the war, but to the peace that comes after. Nothing is more important than my going there. You're just going to have to keep me safe. So 10 days later, on November 27th, the three Allied leaders arrive in Tehran. Churchill is the first to arrive. He arrives at 10 o'clock that morning. His plane lands at the airport outside the city, and he hopes to sneak into Tehran. The meeting, as I said, is still allegedly top secret. The Nazis are not supposed to know about it. But as soon as he gets there, there's a band playing. The British ambassador is there to greet him, and Churchill is fuming. And his consternation and anger just increases as the morning plays out. He's put into an open-top car to be driven to the British embassy across about 10 miles away. And the entire route is lined with Persian cavalrymen in comic opera uniforms. And they're pointing the way that Churchill is going in this open-top car. And Churchill can feel the assassins sighting him in their crosshairs. And he writes in his memoir saying that if this was made to put me in the most possible danger, it couldn't have been more successful. Of course, he's being sarcastic, but he's filled with rage. And he finally makes it to the embassy. He gets behind the large wall, and he finally feels safe. Meanwhile, at 3 that afternoon, FDR's large C-54 plane lands, and Mike very successfully gets him without any ceremony, sneaks him to the American embassy. And he's settling FDR into the presidential suite on the second floor, and he's feeling pretty good about things. And he gets a message that Dmitry Arkadyevich, the Russian spy master, is downstairs and wants to see him. And Mike figures that just means that Marshal Stalin has arrived in town, and maybe the two world leaders will get together that evening. But as soon as he approaches Arkadyevich, he sees that something is wrong. Arkadyevich looks upset. And Arkadyevich tells him that last night, 38 German paratroopers dropped out of the sky in the desert outside Tehran. But he says, we captured them and we interrogated them quite intensively. And when Mike hears this, he thinks, well, I'm glad I wasn't there. The idea of being interrogated by an NKVD man is something I wouldn't want to witness. But then he tells himself, if it makes FDR safer, so be it. And then the Russian continues, and they told us that 6 men came in on a separate plane, and they are loose in Tehran at this very moment. 6 well-trained assassins, and Mike's heart feels like exploding. And for the next 5 days in Tehran, in a city of 1 million people, Mike, working with the Russians, tries to track down these assassins. The events unfold with the relentless momentum of a ticking clock, the hours counting down to the night of the assassins, and how it all plays out, how it's finally stopped, the twists and turns, the shootouts, the suspense, the betrayals. Well, you can read that in my book. That I think captures it directly. And I hope I won't be giving too much away if I let you know that the 3 Allied leaders are not assassinated. And another spoiler alert, the Allies win the war. So let's go to 2 weeks after the Tehran conference is over. We're back in the Oval Office. It's December 17th. The president and Mike have just returned, and there's a press conference. And there's a photograph of the press conference. You can see FDR behind the desk, the press in a semicircle in front of him, Mike in the background, arms crossed stolidly by the window, watching it all. And there's also a recording of this press conference. I heard it at the FDR Library in Hyde Park, New York. And listening to it, you can hear about 12 minutes into the conference, FDR says in a rather casual way, oh, you know, we had a bit of a security problem at the conference. And you can hear the room go hush. It's a pregnant, almost palpable silence. And FDR continues, yeah, there were a group of Nazi assassins on the loose. And then he says, it would have been a pretty good haul if they could have gotten all three of us. And he laughs. He breaks out in a high-pitched laugh, and the press join in laughing with him. And what was even more astonishing to me is that's it. There are no follow-up questions. FDR starts talking about the China problem, and the complacent wartime press allows him to go off on this tangent. And with that, the story remained largely hidden for decades. There were a couple of books after the war. They had pseudonyms and a couple of mentions in news stories, but nothing in any detail. And then a few years ago, the Russian intelligence service, released a treasure trove of previously classified World War II intelligence reports. And these intelligence reports revealed in detail what had happened. And yet I still couldn't believe it. I read translations of them and I said, I never heard of this. So I spent the next 3 years going to archives around the world, reading memoirs, trying to put the pieces together, going on my own hunt. And what I found were really the building blocks that allowed me to write Night of the Assassins. And you can see in my endnotes how I put all the pieces together. So let me circle back to something I said at the beginning of this talk. I said that now we are living in a time when we can understand how important our leaders are and how we can appreciate how a nation can be turned when they're put in jeopardy. Because it was just recently ago, January 6th, when people invaded the Capitol building, when our leaders, Republicans and Democrats, as we saw on the videos that were released, how their lives were put in danger. And we can feel, I think, with a chilling sense of immediacy, how the world might have felt if on the night of the assassins, they succeeded in breaking into Churchill's birthday party to deliver Hitler's birthday present. And let me end with a coda. When my book was first published last June, I was approached by the two guys who had written and created the Homeland TV series. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I always found it really compelling. And these two guys with Sony Pictures have gotten together and they're now developing, I guess that's the Hollywood word, developing a series based on my book. Now, the usual reaction is when Hollywood gets a hold of your work to make a very sober face and say, well, I just don't want them ruining my great work. Well, I must tell you, I'll be very happy when this gets on the air. I'll be flattered and I'll enjoy it a great deal. But let me make a very self-serving suggestion. Maybe you can read the book and then watch the series and you can judge which is a better telling of the events of the Night of the Assassins. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Well, thank you, Howard. Something tells me we're going to have questions. And while everybody thinks about their question and begins to write, remember, folks, if you have a question you'd like to just write, click on Q&A and type your question. If you would like to ask it or speak, click on the raise hand icon. But just as a quick commercial, folks, if you are not already on our mailing list and you're enjoying this program, and we do this every month, So if you would like to join our mailing list and get an automatic invitation to our programs, just put your email address in the chat line, and it would be our pleasure to add you to our blast email list. Okay? All right. Let's see. Now, David Horton, is that left over, or do you have a question for us?
That must be left over. I don't know why.
Okay, so you're all set.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. Kathy asks, how long did it take you to research and then write the book?
Well, I first, as I said, read about it when the Russians released these documents, these World War II declassified intelligence reports. But then, in addition to going to archives, the kind of books I write are all true stories. I try to apply to them the standards of a New York Times reporter, where everything has to be true. If there's dialogue, it has to be actual dialogue that the people say. There are no inventions. But at the same time, I try to tell compelling stories. I try to make narratives with characters. So once I get an idea, I then have to look to see if there are memoirs, there are documents, there are newspaper reports that will allow me to write with a sense of immediacy what my main characters are thinking and feeling. I have to be accurate. So by the time I gather all this, it's close to, and sit down and write, it's nearly 4 years from the original idea to chasing it all down.
Thank you.
Okay. Howard, Gresh Lattimore asks, of the 6 German assassins who arrived separately and escaped the dragnet initially, how many of them were actually found and eliminated or not?
Well, the book builds up to the climatic scene where they're all blown up. All this, the 6 assassins, they are able to get away. What's so fascinating to me is first they get, at one point they're captured, and then real history, as if it were a Hollywood movie, they're able to escape and they keep on getting away. But the last minute, just as they're making their way to the water tunnels, they're caught and they're all dying in an explosion. So it's quite dramatic and true. That's another reason what convinced me that this is a story worth telling. The beats were almost cinematic.
Is this book available as an audiobook?
Yes, it is. Very much so.
Okay, all right. I'd like to ask you, how did you decide to make the switch from being an investigative reporter to being an author of nonfiction books?
Well, I haven't entirely switched. For example, I just did an investigation for the Times earlier this fall, about 10,000 words, called "The Man Who Conned the Beltway," and he was a man who posed as a CIA man who was trying to take money from the 85 billion annual intelligence budget, and he gets and he succeeds, and that ran the Times. But basically, the Times is a young man's job. If you want to raise a family, it really intervenes. You have to be able to, at a moment's notice, travel anywhere in the world. I also liked telling these large stories. In my era at the Times, you were pretty much confined about how much you could write. Now I'm able to write longer articles for the Times. So after about a decade there, and I had some success, I must say, with a book. That was my first book was an international bestseller, he says immodestly. I was then able to go off and knew I could get more book work, and I started doing a little movie work too. So I've been doing that. I've been trying to expand. One of the good things about the job I have is that you keep on learning things. It's like going to school forever. And so I've tried to keep the job, keep it fresh.
Oh, that's wonderful to have that balance. George Burnell would like to either ask you a question or say something. George, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. What I'd like to say, what I'd like to say is that this is just a fascinating story, and it's presented beautifully. And you start on page 1, you won't put it down until you get to to the last page. So this, and I appreciate Howard. I appreciate this presentation today, but it doesn't do the book justice. And
You're very
all the
kind,
twists-
Mr. Burnell. I
all the
appreciate
twists
it.
and turns in the back alleys. You got to read the book, really do.
Well, thank you very much. You're very kind. I appreciate your generous comments. And I hope people will read the book and agree with you. Thank you.
Well, I think you just sold a few more books there. Walter Terzano. Walter, we've unmuted you. Go ahead. You had a question, Walter.
What was the reason that Stalin was hard to coordinate with is because he allegedly refused to fly in an airplane?
There's a great
By
deal of
train.
truth to that. You're right. Stalin kept on making excuses that he was a wartime commander in chief and he didn't want to get too far from the front, but he really didn't want to fly. I think he was scared. He had rarely been in a plane before. I think this was his second time, and Tehran was just a short trip. And he also had a lot of soldiers there. He had 20,000 Russian soldiers in the area.
Thank you.
Bill Poole has a question. Go ahead, Bill.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Last time you couldn't hear me. Mr. Blum, I just want to say I've looked at 14 titles here credited to you. I don't know if there are more, but each one sounds like a page turner. The titles just are so intriguing. I think
Well,
I've got
thank you.
lot
I had a lot of
reading.
tuitions to pay, so I had to keep on churning out books.
Okay. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Okay. Let's see. Comment from Diane. Excellent presentation, Mr. Bloom. Can't wait to read the book and recommend it to my nephew, who is a history buff. I love that this story was hidden for so many years.
Thank you.
There's a question from Alex. Were there any documents that you found in Iran related to the story, and did you consider traveling to Tehran to see the actual locations?
I would have liked to travel to Tehran, but I didn't. I basically, the documents I got, and key documents were German documents that were translated for me about the parachute missions into Tehran, how the training, where the planes took off. And oddly enough, the British documents, I went to England at the British Archives at Kew, had interviews, interrogations really, with many of the participants. There was, in some of the earlier books that have been written, they refer to an Iranian spy, and they don't give her a name. Well, I'm going through the documents at the British Archives, and I find in the box this 17-page typewritten interview with Lily Sanjari, and she's the actual spy, and she tells a fascinating story of being this promiscuous double agent, and as one might imagine, she'll figure prominently in the series, in the TV series. But where you don't have to stick to truth as much as I had to in the book.
Another comment from Ed and Kim Bond. Howard, a comment. If the book is as well written as your verbal storytelling, it will be a terrifically thrilling pleasure to read. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
And then
I can assure you, the book is a lot more lucid and fluent than my speaking.
And Sandra says, I've just downloaded it to my Kindle. And Alex would like to know, were there any documents that you found in Iran related to the story? Did you consider traveling to Tehran to see the actual locations?
Right. No, as I was explaining, I would love to go to Tehran, and I wonder, where we're going to shoot the Tehran scenes to take place. I was speaking before to one of the veterans, and he was talking about the water. I think it was Mr. Lewis, the water tunnels beneath Jerusalem, and that gave me the idea. I wrote that down. We should consider trying to maybe shoot there. That might be possible.
A question about the 6 assassins. Was Otto Skorzeny one of the 6 assassins?
Interestingly enough, he was poised to leave when he realized the mission was falling apart, that the first 38 were being captured. He decided not to go. He stayed out of Tehran. He lived to fight another day. And in the Battle of the Bulge, he led a group of Nazi soldiers in American uniforms, and they were caught, and he was court-martialed. I mean, he was not in war. He went before a war crimes tribunal, and he beat the rap. It was ruled that he could impersonate an American soldier in wartime, and he beat the rap.
It's incredible.
That's interesting. Okay, let me see. Kennedy, who is Kennedy? Bill? Somebody named Kennedy would like to ask a question.
Mr. Bloom, the head of the OSS during World War II was Wild Bill Donovan. In your research, did that uncover any connection he may have had with Kelly?
Well, Donovan, oddly, the 2 guys who were there, those 2 boy spies, one of them was one of his father was a friend of Donovan. That's how he got sent there. He was an archaeology student. And they sent him, they thought, out of the path of the war, really, to Iran, and he wound up there.
Well, you have some fascinating details. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, that was Bill Kennedy. Do we have another Kennedy person?
There are a lot of
would like
Kennedys
to
in
ask a
Massachusetts, I think, right?
That's right. I think we have a second Mr. Kennedy or Ms. Kennedy who would like to ask a question. Who are
No,
you? Go ahead.
I think that was the only one.
You do? Okay.
yeah.
Maybe
We
it
have
was a duplicate. Okay. Let's see. How are we doing?
You have 3 questions in the in Q&A
Okay.
and 2 raised hands.
I don't see the questions in the Q&A, Mina. How come? I just see the one that was answered. Oh, wait a minute. Open. Hang on. I got the tab here. Okay. Judy and Mike Alexander would like to know, please explain why there were 20,000 Soviet troops in Iran during World War II?
At the start of the war, Iran, which was then called Persia, was pro-German. In 1942, I think it's called Operation Countenance, both the Russians and the British decide to invade Tehran. The British come in with about 3,800 troops. The Russians come in with 20,000. And in 5 days, Iran surrenders. The British are in the north. The Russians are a little bit in the north, but they also are settled all around Tehran. They've occupied the city. And in addition to those 20,000 troops, in the week before Stalin's arrival, 3,000 NKVD, that's the spy guys, come in to act as bodyguards to protect him.
Okay. Tom Shipley would like to know, any similar stories we don't know about regarding the Yalta Conference in 1945?
I don't know about them, but who knows? My next book takes place in 1978, so I go up a couple of years, a couple of generations.
Guy Moss would like to know, your lecture reminds me of Ben McIntyre's works. How hard is it to come up with these stories? Do you ever wonder whether you and he are doing the same thing at the same time?
I wonder, I mean, I hope I'm not doing the same as he. He's really good. His stuff is excellent. I know I haven't read his recent book. I think it's Red Sonja, but I did read his book about the Kim Philby affair. He's excellent, and I know they're shooting a series on that too. So we'll see how it compares, but he writes very well.
Tom Shipley again. I just read the Wikipedia article on the Tehran conference. It speculates whether or not an assassination plot actually existed. Do you have any thoughts about updating the Wikipedia article?
I mean, Wikipedia is usually incorrect. It has so many misstatements in my biography that I just sort of just shrug. I don't really read it or refer to it, but maybe I should, or make reference to the book. I don't know. I'll have to consider that.
Okay. Several people were asking about ordering your books, and we've given out information on Amazon, but other people talked about Barnes and Nobles, and several others said that you can go to any bookstore to order your book, and they'll be happy to order it if they don't carry it, and that you can reserve them at the library. So I just want you to know there's just all kinds of questions and answers about how to find your book, Howard.
Well, it's pretty much everywhere. And as you say, any bookstore in the area. I know the Harvard bookstore down there has it. That's not too far from you. And Barnes and Noble has it everywhere. And Amazon will get it to you the next day.
Bill Kennedy, do you have another comment, or is that an old one? I see your hand raised.
I also see Bonnie Carter has her hand up.
Pardon me?
Bonnie Carter has her hand up.
Okay, Bonnie?
Yeah, but Bill just unmuted himself.
All right. Bill, you go first, then we'll call on Bonnie.
Maybe we'll just call on Bonnie.
Okay.
Bonnie, did you have a question?
Hello.
Hi.
This is Walter Carter using my wife's computer.
Hi, Walter.
Hi.
Right ahead.
My question is, do you think the war would have ended differently if the German assassins had succeeded?
You know, it's hard to judge. I mean, Russia doesn't really have a succession rule, so you never know, the infighting that would have occurred. And you wonder what America would have done. Wallace would have been the vice president then. Truman wasn't the vice president until the next term. He was never a big favorite of the war. But there's something else. America was working on the atom bomb at that point, and they were close to developing it. And would the country have been so enraged at the assassination of a beloved president that we might have considered dropping the atom bomb on Germany? There are lots of possibilities, permutations to your question.
Thank you.
Getting back to Otto Skorzeny, Diane says, do you have any plans on writing a book about him? He seems like a fascinating individual. Can you tell us a little bit more about him? Why he's so fascinainating?
Skorzeny is, as I said, the archetypal Nazi Superman. He runs a commando force. He trained guys at a compound called Orienberg. It was sort of Germany's version of Delta Force. And as I said, he doesn't go on this mission. He's involved in the Battle of the Bulge. He's tried for war crimes, but not convicted after the war. He then helps smuggle Nazi war criminals out of Europe to South America. He settles on a farm in Ireland in County Clark. But interestingly enough, while he's moving Nazis out of Europe, the Mossad, according to the Israeli papers, was using him at that time to hunt Nazi war criminals. So he's a man who covers both sides. That's how he was able to stay alive. He's very pragmatic. And he's written 3 memoirs. And what I find the memoirs so fascinating, He keeps on telling the same stories, and each of them, teaching them a little each time.
Any thoughts yourself about writing about him?
No, but I do know in the series, you asked before, does he actually go on the mission? As your listeners have realized, he's too good a character. So the producers have him going into Tehran. He will be there with the 6 who are there to the last day.
Okay, this may be the final question from Guy Moss. What precisely led you originally to realize that this story existed and that follow-up would bear fruit?
Well, as I said before, I had come across a news article about the Russians releasing this treasure trove of previously classified World War II documents. So I got a hold of the documents. I then had them translated, and when I read this, so this is astounding. I never heard of it. This is a true life Day of the Jackal. But then I also wondered, is it true? So I began checking out the sources. And then when I found memoirs of all the participants, Schellenberg, Mike Riley, FDR's bodyguard, Scorzini, I knew I could make these characters come alive on the page because I could capture their thoughts, what they were thinking at any given time with a sense of accuracy and immediacy. And from this, I could build a true story, but also a suspenseful story. So that's how I got into and became committed to the writing.
Well, I think we have exhausted the questions. I hope we haven't exhausted you, but you seem to be as energetic as you were at the beginning of the program. Howard, I think we have, yes, Mina.
Did you see this awesome comment from Ed?
Awesome comment from Ed. Okay.
I just called Barnes & Noble in the next town over, Burlington, and ordered the one hard copy they had in stock. I will pick it up this afternoon, and I look forward to reading it tonight.
Thank you. Let's get them to order more, please.
So,
Send in the troops.
Folks, if anybody buys Howard's book, he has indicated a willingness to somehow sign it. If you send a book label or something, you'll sign
And
it.
you have my email. Give give it out to whoever wants it, and they can send me a book plate, and I'll sign it or something.
Yeah,
We'll
isn't
figure
that
out
wonderful?
something.
Well, thank you.
Or
That's
you can
most
sign it
kind.
and say it's me. Whatever works.
Well, we'll see what we can arrange. We'll do our best to personalize any of the books.
And there's my
Howard,
email on the screen. So great.
I believe we have broken attendance records, Howard, with your
Good.
presentation.
Thank you.
So we cannot thank you enough. It's been terrific. We are honored that you decided to speak to us today, and it was just so well worth it. We thank you very, very much for being with us, and we thank our audience. And we apologize that we had just so many announcements to go over. Thank you all for your patience. This is such a busy time of year, and we only meet once a month, and this is our opportunity to let veterans know of some things that are important to them and things that they should know about. So we thank you for your patience. All right, this concludes our presentation. We will see you again in 1 month. Thank you everybody so much, and good afternoon.